Miss Young, what the hell are you doing? Hunter Davis's voice thundered through the Seattle mansion. On the plush leather sofa, Danielle Young, in her light blue maid's uniform, hair neatly bunned, danced with his triplet sons, Eli, Theo, and Max, in vibrant red shirts. Their laughter rang, springs creaking, as a cookie shaped like a flame tumbled to the floor. This sofa's worth a fortune, Hunter snapped. Danielle, startled, smiled. It can handle some joy, sir. He moved to fire her, but Eli clung to her, sobbing, Mommy, don't go. Max and Theo echoed, Mommy. Hunter froze, the word piercing his heart, unspoken since Claire's betrayal. I'm not your mom, Danielle whispered, but I'm here. Would he cast her out or let her light heal them? What secrets fueled this spark? Vote 1 if it grips you, 0 if it doesn't. Will their broken home find warmth? The Seattle mansion stood like a fortress of stone and sorrow, its marble walls catching the fading glow of a late autumn sunset. Crimson maple leaves swirled outside tall windows, their rustle the only sound in a home where laughter had long since faded. Inside, the air was heavy, as if the house itself had learned to mourn. A grand chandelier hung motionless, its light cold and sterile, illuminating polished floors that echoed no footsteps of joy. In the heart of this opulent tomb, Hunter Davis sat alone in his study, a man carved from ambition but hollowed by betrayal. Hunter, 38, a tech billionaire who'd built an empire from code and grit, stared at the flickering flames in the fireplace. The fire was weak, barely warming the room, much like the life within these walls. His fingers traced the edge of a worn letter, its words seared into his memory. I can't be their mother, Hunter. I'm leaving. Claire's departure 4 years ago had shattered him, not because she'd taken half his heart, but because she'd taken the light from their triplet sons, Eli, Theo, and Max. At 8 years old, the boys had stopped speaking, stopped smiling, their red shirts now faded and folded neatly by the door, untouched like relics of a lost childhood. The study's oak desk was cluttered with contracts, but Hunter's eyes drifted to a child's drawing pinned to the wall, a crude sketch of a flame, drawn by Max, its edges curling with time. The boys were downstairs, he knew, sitting in the vast living room, staring at a TV that played without sound. Eli, sensitive and prone to tears, would be curled in a corner. Theo, defiant and sharp-tongued, would sprawl across the couch, glaring at nothing. Max, the dreamer, would clutch a pencil, sketching flames or stars, lost in a world he couldn't share. Hunter had tried everything, therapists, tutors, even a private detective to track Claire down, hoping her return might spark something in the boys. But the detective's report, buried in a drawer, had been blunt. Claire had a new life, a new man, and no interest in coming back. He stood, shoving the letter into his pocket, and paced to the window. The Seattle skyline glittered faintly in the distance, a reminder of his success and his failure. He'd built this mansion for a family, for birthdays and bedtime stories, but now it was a museum of grief. Every hallway a reminder of Claire's perfume, her laugh, her betrayal. The staff moved like ghosts, dusting surfaces that needed no cleaning, their whispers barely disturbing the silence. Mrs. Helen, the nosy neighbor from the estate across the street, had already spread word of the broken Davis family, her gossip stinging like salt in an open wound. Hunter's phone buzzed, a board meeting reminder, but he ignored it. Work was his escape, 16-hour days coding algorithms to drown out the ache. But tonight, the ache was louder, a dull roar in his chest. He glanced at the fireplace, its embers fading, and felt a pang of guilt. He was their father, yet he couldn't reach them. The boy's silence was a wall he couldn't climb, and every specialist's bill, every failed therapy session, was a brick added to it. Downstairs, the front door creaked open, a sound that cut through the stillness like a knife. Hunter froze, listening. The new maid started today. He'd barely skimmed her file. Danielle Young, 32, recommended by the agency for her reliability. He didn't care who she was, as long as she kept the house spotless and stayed out of his way. The boys needed supervision, not miracles. Yet as he heard her soft footsteps echo in the foyer, something stirred, a faint shift in the air, like the first breath of a fire about to catch. Danielle stepped into the living room, her light blue maid's uniform crisp, her presence a quiet contrast to the mansion's gloom. She carried a small canvas bag, its weight suggesting more than cleaning supplies. The boys, sprawled in their red shirts, glanced up from the muted TV. Eli's eyes widened, wary but curious. Theo crossed his arms, his scowl daring her to speak. Max, pencil in hand, tilted his head, studying her as if she were a new sketch. Danielle set her bag down, her movements deliberate, and smiled. A smile that seemed to carry the warmth of a hearth. "Good afternoon, little knight," she said, her voice low and melodic, like a jazz tune drifting through a quiet bar. "I'm Danielle. I hear this castle needs some tidying, but I bet it's hiding some adventures too." She knelt, pulling a tray of homemade cookies from her bag, each shaped like a tiny flame. "Made these for you. Want to try?" Eli hesitated, his fingers twisting the hem of his shirt. Max edged closer, drawn by the sweet scent, his eyes bright with wonder. Theo snorted, kicking the couch. "We don't need cookies," he muttered, but his gaze lingered on the tray. Danielle didn't flinch. "Fair enough," she said, setting the cookies on the coffee table. "They'll be here when you're ready." She stood, brushing her hands, and began dusting a bookshelf, humming softly, a tune that seemed to soften the room's edges. Hunter, descending the stairs, caught the sound of her hum. It was unfamiliar, intrusive, yet strangely comforting, like a spark in a dark room. He paused at the living room's threshold, watching her move with an ease that felt out of place. The boys were still, but their eyes followed her, a flicker of curiosity breaking through their usual apathy. Max reached for a cookie, nibbling it, and a small smile tugged at his lips. Eli watched, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Even Theo's scowl softened, though he'd never admit it. Hunter cleared his throat, stepping into the room. "Miss Young," he said, his voice clipped, "I expect the house to be kept in order, no distractions." His tone was that of a man used to being obeyed, but Danielle met his gaze unflinching. "Of course, Mr. Davis," she replied, her voice steady, but a little sweetness never hurt a home. She gestured to the cookies, her smile unwavering. He bristled, the word home striking a nerve. This wasn't a home, it was a shell, a place where memories lingered like ash. He turned to leave, but Max's voice stopped him. "It's good," the boy whispered, holding up the flame-shaped cookie. Hunter's breath caught. Max hadn't spoken in weeks. Not to him, not to anyone. He looked at Danielle, her calm presence like a flame holding steady in a storm, and felt a crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. Outside, Mrs. Helen peered through her window, her lips pursed. "A maid making cookies?" she muttered to herself, already crafting her next gossip. But inside the mansion, something was shifting. The fireplace in the living room flared briefly, its light catching the red of the boys' shirts, the blue of Danielle's uniform, and the faintest hint of hope in Hunter's eyes. Could this stranger, with her cookies and songs, bring warmth to a house frozen in grief? Or would she only stir the embers of pain he'd fought so hard to bury? The faint hum of Danielle's jazz tune lingered in the air, a soft rebellion against the mansion's oppressive silence. In the kitchen, where the glow of a single pendant light cast shadows on gleaming countertops, Danielle Young moved with quiet purpose. Her light blue maid's uniform swayed as she slid a tray of flame-shaped cookies into the oven, the sweet aroma curling through the room like a promise of warmth. The fireplace in the nearby living room crackled faintly, its embers struggling to hold their heat, much like the hearts of the three boys seated at the kitchen island. Eli, Theo, and Max, their red shirts a vivid splash against the sterile white of the room. Eli, his sensitive eyes darting nervously, clutched the edge of his stool, watching Danielle's every move. Theo, his arms crossed in defiance, kicked at the counter's base, his scowl a shield against vulnerability. Max, the dreamer, traced invisible flames on the countertop with a finger, his gaze flickering between the cookies and Danielle's calm smile. The boys, 8 years old and bound by a shared wound, hadn't spoken freely since Claire's betrayal 4 years ago. Their silence was a language Hunter Davis knew too well, a mirror of his own guarded heart. But Danielle's presence was beginning to chip at its edges. She pulled the tray from the oven, the cookies golden and crisp, their flame shapes glowing under the light. "All right, knights," she said, her voice a warm melody. "Who's brave enough for round two?" She slid the tray onto the island, the scent wrapping around the boys like an embrace. Max's hand inched forward, hesitating, then grabbed a cookie. He bit into it, crumbs falling onto his red shirt, and a small, unguarded smile broke through. "It's warm," he whispered, the word fragile but piercing in the quiet. Hunter, standing unseen at the kitchen's threshold, felt his chest tighten. Max's voice, so rare, was a blade cutting through years of stillness. He wanted to step forward, to hold his son, but his feet were rooted, heavy with the weight of his failures. Claire's letter burned in his pocket, a reminder of the family he'd lost. Not to death, but to choice. He'd poured millions into his tech empire, yet couldn't buy back his son's laughter. And now this stranger, this maid, was doing what he couldn't. Danielle didn't notice him. She knelt beside Eli, who flinched at her nearness. "You like stories, don't you?" she asked, her eyes soft. "I used to tell one to a little boy I cared for, back when I worked with kids. He loved tales of dragons guarding fires that never went out." Eli's shoulders eased, his eyes locking onto hers, searching for something safe. Theo snorted, kicking harder. "Stories are dumb," he muttered, but his gaze lingered on the cookies, betraying his curiosity. "You say that now," Danielle teased, sliding a cookie toward him. "But even dragons need a snack." Theo's scowl wavered, and he snatched the cookie, biting into it with a grudging huff. The crunch echoed, a small victory in the silent war of the mansion. Hunter's throat tightened. He wanted to dismiss her, to demand order. But the sight of his boys, eating, reacting, living, held him captive. Mrs. Helen's voice broke the moment, sharp and intrusive from the foyer. "Hunter, you in there?" she called, her heels clicking as she entered uninvited, her pearl necklace glinting under the chandelier. The neighbor's eyes narrowed at Danielle, who stood, brushing crumbs from her uniform. "Cookies in a house like this?" Helen said, her tone dripping with judgment. "I thought maids were for cleaning, not baking." Her words were a jab, meant to remind Danielle of her place, but they stung Hunter too, a reminder of the gossip that trailed his broken family. Danielle's smile didn't falter. "A clean house is nice, Mrs. Helen," she said, her voice steady, "but a warm one's better." She handed Eli a cookie, her fingers brushing his, and he didn't pull away. Hunter's jaw clenched. He should defend his rules, his control, but Danielle's defiance, her quiet insistence on warmth, felt like a challenge he wasn't ready to meet. "Enough," Hunter said, stepping into the light. His voice was low, commanding, but it lacked the fire he intended. "Miss Young, focus on your duties. This isn't a bakery." His eyes flicked to the boys, who froze. Eli clutching his cookie, Theo glaring, Max looking down. Danielle nodded, but her gaze held his, unflinching, as if she saw the man beneath the billionaire. "Yes, sir," she said, but her tone carried a hint of something else. Patience, perhaps, or pity. Helen smirked, sensing tension, and excused herself, already plotting her next gossip. "I'll let you handle your staff," she said, her voice syrupy with false concern. As her heels faded, Hunter turned to leave, but Max's voice stopped him again. "Can Danny stay?" he asked, his red shirt crumpled, his eyes wide with a plea Hunter hadn't seen since Claire left. Eli nodded almost imperceptibly, and even Theo's scowl softened, his cookie half-eaten. Hunter's heart pounded. He wanted to say no, to restore the order he'd clung to, but the boy's eyes held him hostage. Danielle, silent now, began wiping the counter, her movements deliberate, as if giving him space to decide. The fireplace in the living room flared, its light catching the red of the boys' shirts, the blue of her uniform, and the weight of Hunter's indecision. He'd hired her to clean, not to stir the embers of a family he'd failed. Yet here she was, her cookies and stories igniting something he'd thought dead. He retreated to his study, the letter in his pocket heavier than ever. Slumping into his chair, he stared at the fireplace, its flames now steadier, as if mocking his resistance. Danielle's hum drifted faintly from the kitchen, a stubborn spark in the frost of his world. He'd built this mansion to hold a family, but it had become a prison. Could this woman, with her flame-shaped cookies and fearless warmth, be the key to unlocking it? Or was she just another flame that would burn out, leaving him and his boys in the cold? Hunter pulled the detective's report from his drawer, its pages worn from countless readings. Claire was gone, living a new life, untouchable. He'd failed to bring her back, failed to fix his sons. But tonight, Max had spoken, Eli had stayed, and Theo had eaten. Small acts, yet monumental in a house where silence was king. He closed his eyes, the hum growing louder, and saw Claire's face. Not in anger, but in absence. Danielle wasn't Claire. She wasn't trying to be. But her presence was a fire, small and unyielding, threatening to thaw the frozen corners of his heart. Downstairs, Danielle tucked the cookie tray away, her fingers brushing the edge of a drawing Max had left. A flame, bold and bright, with 4 stick figures around it. She smiled, unaware of Hunter's turmoil, and whispered to herself, "Keep burning, little knights." The fireplace crackled, as if in agreement, and the mansion, for the first time in years, felt a fraction less cold. Chapter 3. Sparks on the Sofa. The scent of Danielle's cookies lingered, a faint sweetness cutting through the mansion's sterile air. In the grand living room, where the fireplace cast a wavering glow across polished floors, the silence that had long ruled was fraying at the edges. The TV flickered, its muted cartoons ignored by Eli, Theo, and Max, who sat on the plush leather sofa, their red shirts vibrant against its dark sheen. Danielle Young, her light blue maid's uniform slightly dusted with flour, stood at the room's center, her eyes bright with a daring gleam. She held a small speaker, its upbeat pop tune breaking the stillness like a defiant spark. The boys watched, wary but intrigued, as she clapped her hands, her voice a warm challenge. "All right, knights," she said, grinning. "This ship's about to sail. Who's ready to storm the seas?" She kicked off her shoes, climbed onto the sofa, and began to bounce, the springs creaking under her weight. Eli's eyes widened, a mix of fear and wonder. Theo snorted, arms crossed, but his foot tapped to the beat. Max, ever the dreamer, giggled, his red shirt crumpling as he stood, mimicking her. "It's a pirate ship," he shouted, his voice a rare burst of joy. Danielle laughed, her movements loose and fearless, as if the mansion's rules were just ashes to be swept away. Eli hesitated, clutching the sofa's edge, his sensitive heart torn between caution and temptation. "Come on, Eli," Danielle coaxed, her tone soft but firm. "Every pirate needs courage." He bit his lip, then climbed up, his small frame bouncing tentatively. Theo, unable to resist the rhythm, joined with a scowl, muttering, "This is stupid." But his jumps grew bolder, his red shirt flapping as the sofa groaned. The room filled with laughter. High lon lon, a sound the walls hadn't known in years. The fireplace flared as if feeding on their joy, its light dancing across their faces. Hunter Davis, returning early from a board meeting, paused at the living room's threshold, his black vest unbuttoned, tie loosened. The sight hit him like a blow. His sons, silent for so long, bouncing on a sofa worth more than most people's homes, led by a maid who seemed to defy every boundary he'd set. His heart pounded, a mix of fury and something he couldn't name, envy perhaps, or shame. Claire's betrayal had left him guarding this house like a fortress, yet here was Danielle, turning it into a playground. "Miss Young!" he roared, his voice slicing through the music. The speaker cut off, the silence crashing back like a wave. Danielle froze mid-jump, landing awkwardly, her uniform askew. The boys stopped, their red shirts still, their faces paling. Eli shrank back. Theo glared, and Max's eyes darted between his father and Danielle, wide with panic. "This sofa is worth a fortune," Hunter snapped, stepping forward, his shadow looming. "You're a maid, not a circus performer." Danielle steadied herself, her breath uneven but her gaze unflinching. "It can handle some joy, sir," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. The boys needed a spark. Her words were a challenge, soft but sharp, and they stung. Hunter's jaw tightened. He'd hired her to clean, not to upend his carefully ordered world. "You're done here," he said, the words cold, final. "Pack your things." The air grew heavy, the fireplace's crackle the only sound. Max clutched Danielle's hand, his small fingers trembling. "No!" he cried, his voice raw. Theo stepped forward, his defiance flaring. "You can't fire her!" he shouted, his red shirt taut with tension. But it was Eli, the quietest, who shattered everything. He lunged forward, wrapping his arms around Danielle's waist, his face buried in her uniform. "Mommy, don't go!" he sobbed, his voice breaking like glass. Max and Theo froze, then echoed, their voices a desperate chorus. "Mommy!" Hunter staggered as if struck. The word mommy was a blade, cutting through 4 years of silence, slicing open the wound Claire had left. His sons hadn't called anyone that since she walked away, choosing another life over them. He saw her face, her cold smile, her packed suitcase, and felt his knees weaken. Danielle, her eyes glistening, knelt to Eli's level, her voice a whisper. "I'm not your mommy, sweetheart," she said, brushing a tear from his cheek. "But I'm here. I'm right here." Hunter's hands clenched, his mind a storm of rage and grief. He wanted to scream, to banish her, to protect his boys from another loss. But their faces, Eli's tears, Theo's clenched fists, Max's pleading eyes, held him captive. They hadn't just spoken. They'd felt. Something he hadn't seen since Claire's letter. Danielle wasn't Claire, but she was something he hadn't dared hope for. A flame in their darkness. Mrs. Helen's voice cut through, sharp from the open window. "What's all this noise?" she called, her silhouette peering in, her judgment palpable. "A maid playing with the children? Honestly, Hunter." Her words were a spark to his anger, but also a mirror. Was he firing Danielle to save his sons or to save his pride? He'd built an empire, yet couldn't build a bridge to his boys. And here was this woman, with her music and her fearlessness, doing what he couldn't. "Get out," he said, but his voice cracked, aimed at Helen, not Danielle. The neighbor huffed, retreating, her gossip already forming. Hunter turned to Danielle, his eyes burning. "This changes nothing," he said, but the words felt hollow. He stormed out, the boys' cries echoing in his ears, the fireplace's glow mocking his retreat. In his study, he slumped into his chair, the detective's report staring back from the desk. Claire was gone, but his sons were here, and they'd called another woman Mommy. Danielle, still in the living room, held Eli close, Max and Theo beside her. She didn't speak, didn't push. She just sat, the sofa's springs quiet now, the fireplace casting warmth across their huddled forms. Max reached for a cookie from the table, its flame shape crumbling in his hand. "You won't go, right?" he whispered. Danielle's heart ached. She'd cared for a child once, a boy who'd called her family before he was taken away. She wouldn't let these boys lose another light. Hunter, alone, stared at the fire in his study. Its flames were stronger now, as if fed by the chaos below. He'd meant to keep his world controlled, contained. But Danielle's spark was spreading, threatening to burn through his walls. Could he let it? Or would he snuff it out, leaving his sons in the cold once more? The echo of Mommy lingered in Hunter Davis's ears, a haunting refrain that followed him into the shadowed sanctuary of his study. The fireplace's glow flickered across the oak desk, casting jagged shadows on the detective's report he'd pulled from its hiding place. Its pages, worn from countless readings, detailed Claire's new life, a life without him, without their sons. Hunter's fingers trembled as he traced the words, his heart a tangle of rage and regret. He'd hired the detective 2 years ago, desperate to bring her back, believing her return might thaw the frost that had settled over Eli, Theo, and Max. But Claire had chosen another man, another world, leaving Hunter to carry the weight of her betrayal alone. The fire crackled, mocking his failure, its warmth unable to touch the cold knot in his chest. Downstairs in the living room, Danielle Young sat on the sofa, the leather still warm from the chaos of the boys' pirate adventure. Eli clung to her side, his red shirt crumpled, his tear-streaked face buried against her. Max sat cross-legged, nibbling a flame-shaped cookie, his eyes darting between Danielle and the doorway where Hunter had vanished. Theo, ever defiant, stood by the fireplace, kicking at its hearth, his red shirt taut with tension. The word Mommy hung between them, heavy and fragile, a spark that had ignited something none of them could name. Danielle's light blue uniform was slightly askew, a faint smudge of flour on her sleeve, but her voice was steady as she stroked Eli's hair. "You're safe, little knight," she whispered, her words a soft anchor in the storm of their emotions. Hunter, slumped in his chair, felt the mansion's silence press against him, broken only by the faint hum of Danielle's voice drifting from below. He wanted to hate her, to see her as an intruder breaching the walls he'd built to protect his sons. But the image of Eli's tears, Theo's clenched fists, and Max's desperate plea burned in his mind. They hadn't just spoken, they'd felt something he hadn't seen since Claire's letter shattered their world. He'd failed them, pouring millions into his tech empire while their hearts grew quiet. And now this maid, with her cookies and reckless joy, had done what he couldn't. A sharp knock jolted him. Mrs. Helen's voice, shrill and uninvited, pierced the study's door. "Hunter, we need to talk," she said, pushing in without waiting. Her pearl necklace glinted, her eyes gleaming with gossip's fervor. "That maid of yours, turning your home into a circus. The neighbors are talking. A woman like her, so familiar with your boys. It's improper." Her words dripped with judgment, each one a spark threatening to reignite Hunter's anger. He stood, his vest unbuttoned, his voice low, but edged with steel. "My boys are my concern, Helen, not yours." She bristled, undeterred. "They called her Mommy, Hunter. You can't ignore that. What kind of maid?" "Enough!" He cut her off, his tone final. Helen's lips pursed, but she retreated, her heels clicking like a countdown to more rumors. Hunter sank back into his chair, the report crumpling in his fist. Helen's words echoed Claire's absence, but they also mirrored his own fear. Was Danielle crossing a line, or was he the one failing to cross it? In the living room, Danielle felt the weight of the moment settle over her. Eli's small hand gripped hers, his trust a fragile flame she didn't want to extinguish. Max, still holding his cookie, looked up, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why's Dad so mad?" he asked, his eyes searching hers for answers. Theo, by the fireplace, snorted. "He's always mad," he muttered, but his voice cracked, betraying the hurt beneath his defiance. Danielle took a breath, her heart heavy with a memory she rarely shared. "When I was younger," she began, her voice soft, "I cared for a boy, an orphan, who called me family. He'd lost everything, but he taught me that love doesn't need a title. It just needs someone who stays." She paused, her fingers brushing a small locket at her neck, a keepsake from that lost boy. "Your dad's not mad at you. He's just scared of losing you again." Eli's eyes widened, a flicker of understanding breaking through his fear. Max nodded, crumbs falling from his cookie, his red shirt catching the firelight. Theo kicked the hearth again, but softer, his scowl wavering. "He doesn't get it," he said, almost to himself. "You make us not sad." The admission, small but raw, was a crack in his armor, and Danielle's heart swelled. She'd come to clean, not to heal, but these boys, with their silent wounds, felt like echoes of the child she'd once failed to save. Hunter, in his study, heard the murmur of her story, the door ajar just enough to let her words slip through. He froze, the detective's report slipping to the desk. She'd cared for an orphan, given him a home, only to lose him. The parallel cut deep. His boys, too, were orphans of a sort, abandoned by Claire's choice. He'd tried to fix them with money, with order, but Danielle was offering something he'd forgotten: presence. Her story wasn't just a confession, it was a mirror, reflecting his own shortcomings. He stood, drawn to the living room despite himself. The fireplace glowed brighter now, its light softening the room's edges. Danielle sat with the boys, a flame-shaped cookie in her hand, her uniform a quiet contrast to their red shirts. She didn't push, didn't demand. She just listened as Max began to talk, his voice halting but alive, about a dream he'd had of a fire that warmed the whole world. Eli, still clinging to her, whispered, "I don't want you to go." Theo, silent now, stared into the fire, his fingers tracing the edge of his shirt. Hunter lingered in the doorway, unseen, his heart a battlefield. He wanted to storm in, to reassert control, but the sight of his sons, so alive, so present, held him back. Danielle wasn't Claire. She wasn't trying to be. But her warmth, her stubborn refusal to let the mansion's cold win, was unraveling him. He'd hired her to clean, not to kindle a fire in his home. Yet here she was, her quiet strength a flame he couldn't ignore. Mrs. Helen's gossip would spread, he knew, painting Danielle as an overstepping maid, him as a failing father. But as he watched her with his boys, the fireplace casting shadows that danced like hope, he felt a shift. The report on his desk was proof of his past failures, but this moment, this fragile, burning moment, was proof of something else. Could he let this fire grow, or would he smother it to keep his pain contained? Danielle looked up, catching his silhouette. She didn't speak, but her eyes held a question, a challenge. Will you let us burn bright? Hunter turned away, the fire's warmth lingering on his back, and retreated to his study. The embers of his resolve were fading, and for the first time, he wasn't sure he wanted to put them out. The fireplace's glow lingered in Hunter Davis's mind, a stubborn ember refusing to die as he sat in his study. The detective's report crumpled on the desk. Downstairs, the living room was quiet now, the echoes of Mommy fading into the mansion's heavy air. But in the kitchen, a new warmth was stirring. The scent of baking bread wafted through the house, a soft rebellion against the sterile order Hunter had clung to for years. Danielle Young stood at the counter, her light blue uniform dusted with flour, kneading dough with steady hands. The boys, Eli, Theo, and Max, sat at the kitchen island, their red shirts bright under the pendant light, their eyes fixed on her with a mix of awe and hesitation. Eli, his sensitive heart still raw from his outburst, twisted his fingers, his gaze darting between Danielle and the oven. Theo, defiance etched in his scowl, leaned back in his stool, but his foot tapped restlessly, betraying his curiosity. Max, the dreamer, doodled on a napkin, sketching a flame that seemed to dance with the kitchen's warmth. Danielle's presence was a quiet fire, coaxing life from the boys in ways Hunter hadn't dared imagine. Her story of the orphan boy she'd cared for had cracked something open in them, and in him, though he fought to keep it buried. "All right, Knights," Danielle said, her voice a gentle melody. "This bread's going to be our treasure. Who's ready to shape it?" She held up a lump of dough, her smile a spark that lit the room. Max's hand shot up, his red shirt crumpling as he leaned forward. "Can we make it like a fire?" he asked, his voice soft but eager. Danielle nodded, handing him a piece. "A fire it is," she said, her eyes twinkling. Eli hesitated, then took a smaller piece, his fingers trembling as he molded it. Theo snorted, arms crossed. "Bread's boring," he muttered, but his eyes followed her hands, unable to look away. Hunter, drawn by the scent, lingered at the kitchen's edge, his loosened tie a rare sign of vulnerability. The sight of his sons, engaged, alive, pierced him. He'd spent years building walls to shield them from Claire's abandonment. Yet here was Danielle, tearing them down with flour and warmth. His anger from the sofa incident simmered, but it was overshadowed by a deeper ache, guilt. He'd failed to reach them, and now a stranger was succeeding where his millions had not. Danielle didn't see him. She knelt beside Eli, guiding his hands to shape the dough into a flame. "You've got a steady heart, Eli," she said softly. "This fire's going to burn bright because of you." Eli's eyes glistened, a shy smile breaking through. Max, emboldened, shaped his dough with a flourish, giggling as flour dusted his face. Even Theo, unable to resist, grabbed a piece, muttering, "Fine, but mine's better." His fingers worked quickly, crafting a jagged flame, his scowl softening into focus. The oven's warmth filled the room, a stark contrast to the mansion's usual chill. Hunter's chest tightened. He wanted to join them, to feel the dough under his hands, but the weight of Claire's letter held him back. He'd hired a detective to find her, hoping to fix his family, but her rejection had only deepened his shame. Now, watching his sons laugh, he felt like an outsider in his own home. Mrs. Helen's voice shattered the moment, sharp and uninvited from the back door. "Hunter, this is getting out of hand," she said, stepping in, her pearl necklace glinting with judgment. "Your maid's turning your kitchen into a mess. The neighbors are talking, baking with the children. It's not her place." Her words were a spark to Hunter's lingering anger, but they also stung with truth. Danielle was crossing lines, yet those lines were bringing his boys back to life. Danielle stood, wiping her hands on her uniform, her voice calm but firm. "A kitchen's for making memories, Mrs. Helen," she said. "The boys deserve that." Her defiance, soft as a flame, burned through Hunter's resolve. He stepped forward, his voice low. "Helen, leave," he said, his tone final. She huffed, retreating, but her words lingered, a reminder of the gossip spreading like wildfire. Hunter turned to Danielle, his eyes searching hers. "You're pushing boundaries, Miss Young," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Eli looked up, his dough shaped into a perfect flame, his voice trembling. "Dad, don't make her go," he whispered. Max nodded, flour smudging his red shirt. "She makes it not lonely." Theo, silent, stared at his dough, his fingers still, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of agreement. Hunter's throat closed. He'd wanted order, control, but these boys, these fragile, wounded boys, were finding something he couldn't give. Danielle's gaze held his, not with challenge, but with understanding. "They're not asking for much, sir," she said softly. "Just a little warmth." Her words were a mirror, reflecting his failures, but also a spark, igniting a question he wasn't ready to face. Could he let her stay? The oven dinged, and Danielle pulled out the bread, its golden flames filling the kitchen with a scent that felt like home. She handed each boy a piece, their faces lighting up as they tore into it. Max giggled, crumbs falling. Eli ate slowly, savoring each bite. Theo chewed in silence, but his shoulders relaxed, a rare surrender. Hunter watched, his heart a battlefield of pride and pain. He'd built this mansion to be a fortress, but it was crumbling under the weight of their laughter. He turned to leave, but Max's voice stopped him. "Dad, try it," he said, holding out a piece of flame-shaped bread. Hunter hesitated, then took it, the warmth seeping into his fingers. He bit into it, the taste simple but profound, like a memory he'd forgotten. For a moment, he wasn't a billionaire, just a father, tasting his son's joy. Danielle watched, her eyes soft, as if she knew the battle raging within him. Mrs. Helen's gossip would spread, he knew, painting him as a man losing control, Danielle as a maid who didn't know her place. But as he stood there, the bread's warmth in his hand, the boy's eyes on him, he felt the mansion shift. The fireplace in the living room flared, its light catching the red of their shirts, the blue of Danielle's uniform. It wasn't just bread, it was a spark, threatening to burn through the frost he'd let define their lives. Hunter set the bread down, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't let this happen again," he said, but the words felt empty, a reflex of a man afraid to hope. He retreated to the doorway, the fire's glow lingering on his back. Danielle nodded, but her smile held a quiet promise. She wasn't done kindling this flame. The boys ate, their laughter soft but growing, and for the first time, Hunter wondered if he could let it burn. The kitchen's warmth lingered in Hunter Davis's palm, the memory of the flame-shaped bread, a quiet burn against his guarded heart. He stood now in the shadowed hallway, the fireplace's glow from the living room, casting long fingers across the marble floor. Its crackle was the only sound, a stark contrast to the laughter that had briefly filled the house moments ago. Downstairs, Danielle Young knelt beside the hearth, her light blue uniform catching the fire's light as she adjusted a log. Eli, Theo, and Max sat nearby, their red shirts vibrant in the flickering glow, their faces a canvas of tentative trust and buried pain. The word mommy from the sofa incident hung unspoken, a fragile ember that threatened to ignite or extinguish everything. Hunter lingered unseen, his loosened tie a symbol of the control slipping from his grasp. The taste of Danielle's bread still lingered, a simple act that had cracked the wall he'd built around his sons. Eli, sensitive and clinging, sat closest to Danielle, his eyes wide with a need for reassurance. Max, the dreamer, doodled on a scrap of paper, his red shirt smudged with flour, his mind lost in a world of imagined fires. Theo, defiant as ever, leaned against the sofa, his arms crossed, but his gaze was fixed on the flames, a storm brewing beneath his scowl. Hunter's chest ached. His boys were reaching for something he couldn't give. And Danielle, this stranger, was becoming their anchor. Danielle's voice broke the silence, soft as a lullaby. You know, she said, poking the fire, when I was younger, I lived with a boy who'd lost everything. An orphan, scared and alone. I taught him to tell stories to the fire, like it could carry his fears away. She paused, her fingers brushing a locket at her neck, a relic from that lost boy. He'd sit like you, Eli, and whisper secrets to the flames. Eli's eyes glistened, his small hand inching toward hers. Max looked up, his pencil still. What kind of secrets? He asked, his voice a quiet spark. Theo snorted, kicking the hearth. Fires don't care about secrets, he said, but his voice cracked, a fissure in his armor. Danielle turned to him, her gaze steady. Maybe not, she said, but they listen. Want to try? She handed him a stick, gesturing to the fire. Theo hesitated, his red shirt taut with tension, then took it, his fingers trembling. He leaned forward, whispering so low only the flames could hear. I kept her bracelet, he said, his voice barely audible. Mom's. She didn't want me, but I kept it. Hunter, hidden in the shadows, felt his heart lurch. Theo's confession was a blade, slicing through years of silence. Claire's bracelet, a silver chain Theo had clutched the day she left, had been his secret, a wound he'd guarded alone. Hunter had seen it once, tucked in Theo's drawer but never dared ask, afraid of the pain it would unleash. Now Theo's words to the fire, to Danielle, were a surrender, a cry for something Hunter hadn't known how to offer. Danielle didn't push. She nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. That's a heavy thing to carry, she said. Want to let the fire hold it for a while? Theo's jaw tightened, but he pulled the bracelet from his pocket, a delicate chain, glinting in the firelight. He held it over the flames, his hands shaking, then drew it back, unable to let go. Eli reached out, touching his brother's arm, his voice a whisper. It's okay, Theo. Max, clutching his drawing, added, the fire won't take her away. It'll just make it lighter. Hunter's throat closed. He wanted to step forward, to hold Theo, to tell him he wasn't alone. But the weight of his own failures, Claire's rejection, the detective's useless report, kept him rooted. He'd tried to shield his sons, to keep their world orderly. But Theo's confession revealed the truth. They were carrying burdens he hadn't seen. Danielle, with her quiet strength, was giving them a space he'd never created. Mrs. Helen's voice, sharp and unwelcome, cut through from the front door. Hunter, you home? She called, barging in, her pearl necklace gleaming with self-righteous curiosity. I heard about the sofa nonsense. Now this, storytelling by the fire? Your maid's turning this place into a spectacle. Her words were a spark to Hunter's smoldering anger, but they also burned with a truth he couldn't ignore. Danielle was changing everything, and he wasn't sure he could stop it. Helen, leave, he said, stepping into the light, his voice low but firm. She blinked, startled, but retreated, muttering about propriety. Hunter's eyes met Danielle's, her calm unwavering despite the accusation. You're stirring things up, Miss Young, he said, his tone a mix of warning and weariness. This house doesn't need more chaos. Danielle stood, brushing ash from her uniform, her voice steady. It doesn't need chaos, sir, she said, but it needs heart. Your boys have plenty. They just need someone to hear it. Her words were a flame, burning through his defenses, and he felt exposed, raw. Theo, still clutching the bracelet, looked up at his father, his eyes a mix of defiance and desperation. She listens, he said, his voice breaking. You don't. The words hit Hunter like a physical blow. He staggered back, the fireplace's heat suddenly stifling. Theo, his rebel son, had spoken a truth he'd avoided. He'd been absent, hiding behind work and grief, while Danielle had stepped into the void. Eli's hand tightened on Danielle's. Max's drawing fell to the floor, a flame with 4 figures, and Hunter felt the ground shift beneath him. He turned, retreating to the hallway, his heart pounding. The fire's glow followed him, a relentless reminder of the warmth he'd failed to provide. In his study, he'd faced the detective's report again, but now it felt irrelevant. Claire was gone, but his boys were here, and they were reaching for Danielle. He sank into his chair, the bracelet's image seared in his mind. Theo's pain, Eli's trust, Max's hope. They were alive, and he was losing them to a woman who dared to light a fire in their frozen world. Danielle, back in the living room, sat with the boys, the fire crackling softly. She didn't speak, just let them be. Theo with his bracelet, Eli with his trust, Max with his dreams. She handed Theo a piece of paper, gesturing to the fire. "Write something," she whispered. "Let it go." Theo scrawled a single word, "Mom," and tossed it into the flames, watching it curl and vanish. The fire flared, and for a moment his shoulders lifted, lighter. Hunter alone felt the mansion's walls close in. Danielle wasn't just a maid. She was a force, a flame he couldn't control. Could he let her burn, let her warmth heal his sons? Or would he snuff her out, keeping them all in the cold he'd come to know so well? The flicker of Theo's paper burning in the fireplace haunted Hunter Davis, its ashes a silent accusation of his distance. The living room, still warm from Danielle's presence, felt less like a tomb now, but Hunter carried its weight as he stood on the mansion's back patio, staring into the snowy night. A small fire pit glowed, its flames casting a soft light across the frost-covered lawn, a fragile beacon against the Seattle chill. Inside, Danielle Young and the triplet boys, Eli, Theo, and Max, were gathered in the kitchen, their laughter a faint echo through the open door. The fire pit's crackle mirrored the shift in Hunter's heart, a slow thaw he couldn't yet name. Danielle, her light blue uniform smudged with flour, knelt by the kitchen counter, guiding the boys in rolling out dough for marshmallow pastries. Their red shirts glowed under the pendant lights, a vibrant contrast to the mansion's sterile past. Eli, his sensitive eyes bright with focus, shaped his dough into a lopsided flame, giggling when it collapsed. Max the dreamer crafted a star, his fingers nimble, his face alight with a joy Hunter hadn't seen in years. Theo, still guarded, worked silently, but his hands moved with purpose, shaping a jagged fire that mirrored his inner storm. Danielle's voice, warm as the fire pit outside, wove through their chatter. "These pastries are our secret weapon, knights," she said, grinning. "We'll roast them outside and conquer the cold." Hunter, bundled in a red sweater, a rare echo of his son's shirts, watched from the patio, his breath visible in the icy air. Theo's confession about Claire's bracelet had cracked something open in him, a wound he'd buried under work and control. He'd failed to hear his son's pain, but Danielle had, offering them a space to burn their fears. Her story of the orphan boy she'd cared for lingered in his mind, a mirror to his own loss. Not of Claire, but of the father he'd meant to be. The fire pit's flames danced, urging him to step closer, to join the warmth he'd resisted for so long. Eli's laughter pulled him back. The boy ran outside, his red shirt flapping, holding a tray of pastries. "Dad, come roast with us," he called, his voice a spark of hope. Max followed, balancing his star-shaped dough, his eyes wide with excitement. Theo trailed behind, his pastry clutched tightly, his scowl softer now, almost expectant. Danielle emerged carrying skewers, her uniform catching the firelight. "Ready for a feast, Mr. Davis?" she asked, her tone light but piercing, as if daring him to belong. Hunter hesitated, his heart a battlefield of pride and longing. He'd built this mansion to shield his sons, but it had caged them instead. Now their laughter, their red shirts glowing by the fire, felt like a lifeline. He stepped forward, taking a skewer from Danielle, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact was electric, not romantic, but raw, a reminder of connection he'd forgotten. "Let's see if these knights can cook," he said, his voice gruff but warm, a tentative step toward them. The boys cheered, clustering around the fire pit. Eli skewered his pastry, holding it close to the flames, his face lit with awe. Max spun his star, giggling as it browned. Theo, still wary, roasted his jagged flame, his eyes darting to Hunter, searching for approval. Danielle knelt beside them, her presence steady, guiding without controlling. "Careful, Theo," she said softly. "A good fire needs patience." Theo nodded, his guard lowering, and Hunter felt a pang. Danielle was teaching them what he hadn't. Mrs. Helen's voice cut through, sharp and unwelcome, from the patio's edge. "A barbecue in this weather?" she called, her pearl necklace glinting as she approached, her coat pulled tight. "Hunter, your maid's turning this place into a carnival. The neighbors are whispering, 'She's too close to your boys.'" Her words were a spark to Hunter's lingering doubts, but they also burned with a truth he couldn't ignore. Danielle was crossing lines, but those lines were breathing life into his sons. He turned, his red sweater catching the firelight, his voice firm. "They're my boys, Helen," he said, "and Danielle's giving them something I couldn't." Helen's eyes widened, her gossip stifled, and she retreated, muttering about propriety. Hunter's heart raced. He'd defended Danielle, a choice that felt like betrayal to the order he'd clung to, yet also like freedom. Danielle met his gaze, her eyes soft with gratitude. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice low. Eli tugged her sleeve, his pastry golden. "Danny, it's done!" he cried, offering her the first bite. She took it, laughing as a marshmallow stuck to her chin, and the boys roared with delight. Max handed Hunter a pastry, his star slightly charred. "Try it, Dad," he said, his voice trembling with hope. Hunter bit into it, the sweetness sharp against his guilt, and for a moment he was just a father, not a billionaire. Theo, silent until now, spoke, his voice barely above the fire's crackle. "You're not mad anymore, are you?" he asked, his eyes fixed on Hunter, the jagged pastry in his hand. Hunter's throat tightened. Theo's bracelet, his pain, was still raw, but here he was, reaching out. "No, Theo," Hunter said, his voice breaking. "I'm not mad." He knelt, pulling Theo into a hug, the boy's red shirt warm against him. Eli and Max joined, their arms a circle of trust Hunter hadn't felt in years. Danielle watched, her uniform glowing in the firelight, her heart heavy with a familiar ache. The orphan boy she'd cared for had loved fires too, his laughter a flame she'd failed to keep burning. These boys, though, were different. They were hers to protect, if only for a moment. She handed Theo a skewer, her smile a quiet promise. "Your fire's strong, Knight," she said. Theo's lips twitched, almost a smile, and Hunter saw it, his chest swelling with a mix of awe and shame. The fire pit blazed, its warmth wrapping around them, a fragile circle against the snow. The neighbors' whispers, Helen's gossip, faded into the night. Hunter looked at Danielle, her presence a flame he couldn't extinguish. She wasn't Claire, wasn't trying to be, but she was something more, a light in the darkness he'd let define his home. He took another bite of Max's pastry, the taste grounding him, and felt the mansion shift, its walls less cold, its heart beating again. Eli laughed, marshmallow on his cheek, and Max began a story about a fire that warmed the stars. Theo, still in Hunter's arms, relaxed, his jagged pastry crumbling into the fire. Hunter held his sons, their red shirts a beacon, and realized he wasn't just their father. He was part of their flame. Danielle's eyes met his, a silent question. "Will you let this burn?" He didn't answer, but the fire's glow held his gaze, a promise he wasn't ready to break. The fire pit's warmth lingered in Hunter Davis's chest, a quiet flame that flickered against the frost of his past. The snowy night had given way to a crisp Seattle spring, and the mansion's back lawn was alive with the scent of blooming tulips and the hum of new life. The fire pit, now a centerpiece for a neighborhood barbecue, crackled softly, its glow casting shadows across a patchwork of picnic blankets. Danielle Young stood near it, her light blue uniform catching the sunlight, a tray of flame-shaped cookies in her hands. Eli, Theo, and Max darted through the crowd, their red shirts bright as embers, their laughter a melody that had once been unthinkable in this house. Hunter, in a red shirt mirroring his sons, watched from the edge, his heart a tangle of gratitude and lingering guilt. Eli, his sensitive eyes sparkling, chased Max through the grass, his giggles high and free. Max, the dreamer, waved a stick like a wand, pretending to summon fires from the air. Theo, once defiant, ran alongside them, his red shirt untucked, a rare grin breaking through his guarded exterior. The boys, 8 years old and once silenced by Claire's betrayal, were alive again, their joy a fire that burned through the mansion's cold legacy. Danielle's presence had kindled it, her quiet strength a spark that had grown into a blaze. Hunter's fingers tightened around a paper cup, the lemonade inside untouched. The barbecue was his idea, a reckless departure from his usual isolation, spurred by the boys' laughter and Danielle's unyielding warmth. Neighbors milled about, their chatter a stark contrast to the gossip Mrs. Helen had once spread. Helen herself stood nearby, her pearl necklace glinting, her expression softened by the scene. She'd come, uninvited as always, but her judgment had waned, replaced by a grudging awe at the mansion's transformation. Danielle set the cookie tray on a table, her smile a beacon. "All right, knights," she called, her voice cutting through the crowd. "Who's ready for a fire feast?" The boys rushed to her, Eli tugging her sleeve, Max offering a lopsided cookie, Theo holding back but watching with quiet pride. Hunter's chest ached. He'd built this house to cage his pain, but Danielle had turned it into a home, her flame-shaped cookies and fearless heart breathing life into his sons. He stepped forward, drawn by their laughter, his red shirt a silent vow to belong. "Mind if I join?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Eli's eyes widened, a grin spreading. "Dad, you gotta try Danny's cookies," he said, thrusting one forward. Max nodded, crumbs on his chin. "They're the best." Theo, still reserved, offered a half smile, his hand brushing his pocket where Claire's bracelet once hid. Hunter took the cookie, its warmth seeping into his fingers, and bit into it, the sweetness sharp against the bitterness of his past. The crowd quieted, sensing a moment. Hunter cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping the lawn before settling on Danielle. "I owe you all an apology," he said, his voice steady but raw. "This house was a shell, and I let it stay that way. I thought control could protect us, but it only kept us cold." He looked at his sons, their red shirts glowing in the firelight. "Eli, Theo, Max, you deserved better. And Danielle," he paused, his eyes meeting hers. "You brought the fire back. You gave me my boys." The words hung heavy, a confession that stripped him bare. Eli's eyes glistened, Max's widened, and Theo's softened, his guard crumbling. Danielle's lips parted, her uniform catching the fire's glow, her heart racing with a familiar ache. She'd cared for an orphan boy once, loved him like her own, only to lose him to a system that didn't care. These boys, though, were hers to hold, if only for this moment. "They were always yours, Mr. Davis," she said softly. "I just helped them shine." Eli ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Danny, you're our fire," he whispered, his voice trembling with trust. Max joined, his red shirt crumpled, his voice bright. "You make everything warm." Theo hesitated, then stepped forward, his eyes meeting Hunter's. "You're not mad anymore, right, Dad?" he asked, his voice low but clear. Hunter knelt, pulling him close, his red shirt blending with his son's. "No, Theo," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm not mad. I'm here." The fire pit flared, its light wrapping around them, a circle of warmth against the spring breeze. The neighbors watched, some wiping tears, others smiling, their whispers now of admiration, not gossip. Mrs. Helen approached, her expression sheepish. "I was wrong about you, Danielle," she said, her voice quiet. "This house, it's alive again." Danielle nodded, her smile soft but firm. "It's not the house, Mrs. Helen," she said. "It's the people." Hunter stood, his sons beside him, their hands in his. He looked at Danielle, her uniform a quiet symbol of her strength, and felt the weight of Claire's betrayal lift, just a fraction. She wasn't here, but his boys were, and so was Danielle. He handed her a stick, gesturing to the fire pit. "Your turn, Danny," he said, using her name for the first time, a small surrender. She took it, her eyes shining, and skewered a marshmallow, holding it to the flames. The boys cheered, their red shirts a blaze of color, their laughter a song that filled the lawn. Danielle handed the roasted marshmallow to Max, who split it with his brothers. "This is our fire," he said, his voice bright with wonder. Eli nodded, his eyes on Danielle. "You stay, right, Danny?" he asked, his voice a plea. She knelt, her uniform brushing the grass, and hugged him. "I'm here, Knight," she said, her voice a promise. Theo looked at Hunter, his hand tightening in his father's. "We're a family now, aren't we?" he asked, his voice raw but hopeful. Hunter's throat closed, the fire's warmth seeping into his bones. He nodded, unable to speak, and pulled his sons close. Danielle stood, her presence a steady flame, and for a moment they were a circle. Four figures bound not by blood, but by choice. The fire pit crackled, its light dancing across their faces, and the mansion, once a tomb, felt alive, its walls humming with the pulse of a home. The neighbors clapped, their voices a soft chorus, and Hunter looked at Danielle, his eyes wet. "You taught me something," he said, his voice low. "Family isn't what you build. It's what you choose to keep burning." Danielle smiled, her eyes reflecting the fire. "And fires need tending, Mr. Davis," she said. "We'll keep this one bright." The flames leaped higher, casting a glow that reached the tulips, the stars, the heart of the mansion. Hunter held his sons, their red shirts a testament to their rebirth, and knew this was no longer a place of shadows. It was a home, forged in the fire of love, resilience, and a woman who dared to light the way. The fire in the Davis mansion has burned bright, warming hearts once frozen by loss. Hunter, Eli, Theo, Max, and Danielle remind us that family is forged not by blood, but by love that dares to kindle in the darkest moments. Their story, a blaze of resilience and hope, invites you to reflect. What spark has warmed your life when shadows fell? Share your thoughts below. Let's build a community of stories that light the way. Thank you for joining this journey, for feeling their pain and joy. Your presence fuels these tales. Until we meet again by another fire, keep tending the flames in your own heart. Vote 1 if this story touched you, 0 if it didn't. See you soon with more stories of love and second chances.